This is very much an activation which requires the integration of many, many different types of digital art into the many, many types of architectural pattern language, which has both a unified but also a very particular quality of difference from place to place. There are open spaces, there are closed spaces, so part of the curation process is to sometimes put things in a dialogue with each other or provide zones where people who are going through the festival can stop. Nicola, who won a couple of years ago, is here this year. He's doing a live VJ performance in the cherry trees just before the little bridge. And people who've sort of seen that are going to be just blown away. The whole area is mapped and decomposes and recomposes with the audio in real time. It'll be crazy. Nico from Finland has come and produced imagery with satellite imagery of the local area and a very beautiful commentary on how the landscape forms part of this kind of evolving pattern language. And his work is generative, so when you see it, the only time that the image you see will be there is the moment you see it, because it's all created in real time. David's doing an incredible piece down on the fire pit. So he's got two buildings there, very precisely mapped. So he's producing almost like an environmental structure within that place. So there's a real sense of presence to the work. George Berlin from Chicago is doing the bridge, the big bridge on the lake. And that's a really fun, exuberant sort of piece. So you'll see very, very different kinds of moods, different kinds of work as you move through the place. But we're really trying to not only produce something which dignifies the art, because we're very conscious of the fact that this is one of the premier artistic events in this precinct. You know, there's not a formal gallery of modern art or something in that sense, but I think we sort of exceed that in some ways because we bring very cutting edge art, very cutting edge technology to this from around the world and from very talented artists, and it's kind of very particular to the place. It's not like you're walking into a white box and looking at pictures on a wall. The experience is so unique that you will see it over the next 2 days or 3 days, and then it'll be gone. There are things you'll see here that you'll never see again. There are images that you'll see that will never be the same. And that's a really interesting idea because you have to kind of grasp hold of that and see it as an experience rather than a kind of fixed object, if that makes sense. So that's probably a preface to how we think about these things. And we want to sort of go through the town and talk about you know, some of the architectural inspirations for spaces and then how we respond to those in terms of how we program them and what we want to sort of see in the festival. So Marieanne, do you want to talk about where we're standing now?
Sure, and just to build a little bit on what John said, I want to encourage everybody who is here to, for me, I'm always, and I know I geek out on this, but I'm always tickled pink when I go to one of these works and the artist who created it is there. So I want to encourage anybody who is here, who's attending, absolutely take the time to stop and talk to the artists about their work, their inspiration, because it is completely enlightening. I know that when I look at the work and I may appreciate it for its beauty or for the color or for so many other things, but when you actually listen to the reasons as to why it is as compelling as it is and what the thought process was for the artist, it's just amazing. So for me, it's always such a treat. So yeah, we are at the base of the very first pedestrian path in Alys Beach. I'm not going to go too much into the architecture and urbanism of Alys, but what is so, to us, so special about Alys is that there's been a tremendous amount of attention to detail that has been applied to the architecture and to the urbanism and to the landscape and to the paving. And so, you know, we're told sometimes, you know, oddly enough, oh, you guys torture details. And we're like, yeah, we do it, and we're very proud about that because it does make a difference. We pay a lot of attention to everything that is kind of at eye level. So a lot of things most people probably wouldn't even realize why it is appealing, but subconsciously we pay attention to, you know, vistas and line of sight and actual relationships and giving gifts to the street in the form of fountains and planters and doggy bowls and all sorts of things. And so it really makes a very big difference. And when you're walking down the streets of Alys, whether you're looking up, whether you're looking across, or whether you're just even looking down, there's just a lot of attention has been paid to the details. And so to see the job that John and his team have done in terms of curating each piece to the architecture, I think is phenomenal. Looking at some of the work that's been done there, when it's truly been mapped to a particular facade, is super interesting. And so, yeah, this is the very first pedestrian path for Alys Beach, and it is one of many pedestrian paths that all the way from the north, all the way to the south, you have an open vista and you can see the water. We have a little bit of topography here. For people who are from mountainous regions, it's really funny, but we get that view, and it's paramount to us that that view is not blocked. So we keep the hedges trimmed so that it never blocks the view all the way from the north as you're walking your way. So every house will have some kind of entry. In many cases, they are zaguan gates, zaguan being a covered hallway to a courtyard, and it is encouraged to have little openings in them so that you can peek through, and it just is just seductive enough to give you a glimpse of what's beyond, but doesn't reveal everything. So that's a first start. So this is really a culmination of art and architecture and urbanism. So the three of them kind of come together and I think create something really special. For all of us who live and work in Alys, there's so many people behind the beauty here. It's just so great to have for once a year where the whole town is turned into a kind of a live canvas, and to see the work of so many artists transform the town, because we go from white walls to vibrant, colorful walls. I also want to encourage people to listen to the music of the piece. I mean, nobody feel rushed. Everybody take your time and just savor it.
You'll notice a couple of things this year. Della, the new where Oku restaurant is, that's been mapped. There's a pre-show on there at the moment, which is kind of paint style graffiti type imagery, but there'll actually be a program on there during the festival. So that's kind of interesting to us because it addresses the street, and what we're partially interested in is how you produce something which addresses passers-by who aren't maybe coming into the rest of the festival, but there's the sense that it's not an enclosed environment. It's a little bit porous to the community. I've been working on mapping the butteries for 11 years. So that's really important because we don't just project onto them, but we work with very accurate outlines, and we conform the outlines exactly to the butteries. So at the moment there's a reels thanking that some of the sponsors. So when you come down 30A, you'll see that and you'll be like, oh, yeah, I like those people, hopefully, right? Because that's what sponsorship's for. And it's very kind that people are involved with the festival and they look to underwrite some of its cost. A lot of people are like, oh, but you're doing this for a profit. It's like, really not. One of the things you're not aware of is we get a 60-foot Pantec of projectors, and a projector is 2 washing machines in a case. And that is, if you can imagine 97 of those, and the lenses and the speakers, they all come out of a giant semi-trailer. It takes 2 hours to unload them. We have 24 crew who distribute them around on golf carts. I come in March usually, and we do the judging. We work out what we're having, and then we start to place those things around the precinct. And very particularly, we're trying to say this projector's going in this place, it's facing this building, this is the coverage, this is the lens it's going to use to achieve that coverage. So Jonah Allen, who's a local artist, beautiful kind of observational work of nature, of the ocean, very connected to those sort of rhythms. Lovely piece this year in North Charles, where it's called Where the Sky Meets the Sea. So you get this, piece which starts off with a beautiful horizon line. But one of the things we've tried to do is not just make this like a little projection on the wall, but to kind of go full scale. So a lot of these are the building. The building is kind of very intimately connected with the projector, and that requires, with the distance, because it's just across the road, we're using a very wide lens which can accommodate that throw, if that makes sense. So the crew come in, we're very particular about once we've set up, and there's a lot of setup, where we get power from. Are there generators? Are there homeowners who will let us use power? Do we need specialist power for some of the projectors? It's higher voltage. All these little questions. There's months and months of that work, and we work from a spreadsheet which has hundreds of lines with this projector, this lens, this site, this audio, this is what it's going to play back from. And that's kind of preparing you so that when those projectors came in on Thursday, we could start putting them onto golf carts. Truss was already going up around the area, and we were sort of putting projectors out into position, ready to do. Every evening we have about 3.5 hours of time to sort of focus, to get things into position. So it's pretty hectic up till last night. So this is good. Now, one of the things about the pattern language of Alys is that, as Marieanne said, it does encourage a kind of convivial experience of space. You know, the space is not just about orienting yourself towards getting somewhere or being somewhere, but it provides opportunities for people to sit and to mingle.
To linger.
To linger, and we try to accommodate that. It's a sort of opening and closing of spaces, and the modulation of people as they move through. We try and do things which are sort of germane to that work. We have a couple of spots where we talk about the Instagram walls, because the festival is many things to many people, so people want to take a photo of themselves. They want to enjoy the experience. It's very contemporary to sort of record yourself in place. And that's also part of the ephemeral nature of it. So we try to make opportunities for that, and there are very specific things that are placed in those areas.
Just to add to what John again is saying, I think that the architecture and the urbanism at Alys is very episodic, and the art is in a way as well. It's always interesting to me to see what will have been selected to be on the bridge, because we have that reflection line, and everything that is there is it's a mirror image of that you will see on. This is a different experience. Walking down this path is a very different experience to walking down North Charles, which does have trees. And it's great. We have a canopy of trees. It's wonderful for walking, in the middle of the summer. But again, the curator has done a really good job of sometimes incorporating actually the trees and the shadows that is cast by the trees onto the facades. And so it's really compelling. So it is episodic, and it's not everything is the same. That's why it's good to linger.
And to this point, the first thing you'll notice if you come in through this gate is Carlos's piece. It's a giant vortex. It's a really beautiful read. It's like full scale. And the idea is that people can come along 30A. They'll see things on the butteries. They'll see things within we've got Dane Howard has a really big AI generated piece behind Raw and Juicy. Raw and Juicy has a local high school student who's done a piece with really beautiful animation, very festive, about Alys Beach particularly, but there'll be those kind of elements which face the road. So part of the festival is not to be like this enclosed experience, but to be something which has almost like a membrane facing the community as it moves by. And so people can become curious, or they can see something, or they could sit in the town centre and just enjoy some part of it if they're not, ticketed. And people have said to us, "Oh, why do you have tickets?" And I said, mainly for safety, because if you didn't, people stumbling on little paths at night along the lake, we really on Saturday night will be very much at capacity, safe capacity for the entire area. So a lot of that is really just taking on the aspect of how the public are into that. And Kelly, you could probably talk about that from your point of view.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go back to you had mentioned this nice rig pulls up with all these projectors, and they're unloaded, and they're all the same, and they're all the same brand, and we did not have that when we started. So I'm very jealous of how far the festival has progressed. There was a lot of like, hey, can we borrow your office projector? I had a projector I carried around for years in the Yukon. It would fall out of the Yukon and land, and it worked. It continued to work. So I kind of want to find that and see if we can have that as a relic in the Smithsonian of Digital Graffiti. But as far as attendance goes, Friday night is the all-inclusive, so it's a very different feel because there's a limited number of people who can attend based on the amount of food that can be provided, the amount of, I'm thinking it's donated, food and beverage. So that has to be very controlled, and it really allows, like you're saying, to linger, grab your glass of wine, have a bite to eat, talk to your neighbor, talk to the artist, make a new friend. You could walk through here 3 or 4 times and see something different every single time from a different perspective. We walked last night with John, and I was fascinated by this piece of art that fell off to the side that wasn't really, I don't think it was intentional, but I took a picture of it and was very just intrigued by it. So you might find some little Easter eggs that are just unintentional, or maybe they were intentional, I don't know, John. But then Saturday night definitely typically has a larger, I hate to say more rambunctious, but just a different feel. It's a different experience. So I think
A lot more people.
yeah, Friday night is definitely the night to talk to the artists, interact with your friends, make conversation, interact with new friends. So.
And that's also because we're trying to provide something which isn't like a unitary experience, that it addresses many people's interests and many people's sort of requirements of the space and what that should be. So yeah, Friday night's different to Saturday night, it's different to Homeowners Preview tonight. All of those different streams are quite unique in their own way, and they offer a different way into the festival, just as the work offers different ways into experiencing it. So let's take a walk down to the fire pit and talk about how we're sort of programming here. This wall, you'll notice tonight, it's Marilyn Morgan from, I think she's from Destin, yes. And this is another thing. We have, like, I would say some of the most accomplished people in this medium internationally who attend the festival and come in as resident artists. But we also have a lot of local artists, and this may be the first time they've entered something like this. And the local artists, I think it's really important to build a sort of vertical community that allows, it's not like exclusionary, if that makes sense. So Marilou's piece is a really, and people respond to it. It's a what's called rotoscoping of a young girl who plays on her own, and she's like animated on top of a backdrop, and it's got children's drawings around the piece. And it's interesting because the girl's this central figure. She just goes through this loop, and she's very self-absorbed, and then occasionally she looks out and addresses your gaze and then goes back to her play. And it's a little bit out of like real time. It's sort of frame by frame. It's got a very leisurely feel to it, but it's got this very intimate sort of personal sense of connection. And so the work, I think, really stands on its own. So sometimes things are complex, sometimes they're very simple. And again, this is part of providing the breadth of what you want to do with the festival. This area, a group of artists from Hong Kong are here, and then we have a group of school students from Seacoast and Seaside. So you'll see the younger students are around as North Charles opens up. They're on the wall here, and the high schoolers are here. And we worked with them for the last few months with our art teachers, giving them templates for the building. So they had an outline, and they could take it into an iPad and work on that frame by frame. So what they animated would correspond between the different pieces and also to the building. And then we take their work, map it back to the building, and so it's able to feel like it's integrated with the form. And so making that easy for the kids is really important because it gives them, I think one of the big things, this is also another part of the festival, bringing in what we call emerging artists, and they may be college-age students who are studying art, but they may be school children. And this gives them a very different sense of themselves. The opportunity for people to feel that a new gateway opens, this is, I think, really important. I had the experience years ago. I was teaching at SCAD, and I brought students here to work on the show. And one of my students from China, who's since completed his PhD back in China, he got really into it. But Han was standing there in the pool with this look, just a million miles away. I'm like, Han, are you okay? He said, yeah, no, I'm great. I'm like, you don't look great, you sure? He said, no, I'm very good. I said, what is it? He said, everything's changed. I said, that's good, right? He said, oh, it's great. I've changed, how I think about things has changed, everything's different. And I sort of twigged that he saw himself in a totally new light, that he was not outside of this event or the group, that the platform here could give something to people as artists to see themselves integrated with something much larger than themselves. And I think that's really unique, to be able to bring people into that opportunity. So aside from the artists, you know, our fabulous residents, all the people who are competing in the sort of festival itself, we have, I think this year, probably about 40 artists of college age and about another 40 from school age, from the local communities. And so it's geographically diverse. It's all over the United States. They're from Hong Kong. They're from, up the road. And this is a big thing for us, that we also want to make the festival as geographically diverse as possible. Katie, who's chatting up the back. Katie's here with some groups from Cypress College in California, and they've come out. This is their second year, but they'll be VJing at the Colette pool. afterwards. So, and the students are there busy preparing work today. And I think all of these things, you know, you don't realise, but some of the things you see are very much experiential learning things for people as much as they are an event and a festival. So it's kind of I think that idea of generosity is really important, that the experience itself, and the artists are very generous in giving their time and giving their work, but also the environment and the festival itself is generous to the people, that, you know, it can bring people into that experience and create a new dialogue for those people who are, in many cases, particularly college-age people, they're at a transitional phase, and if you give them the confidence that what they're doing has an impact in the world, they can turn on that. And I can attest to the fact that this festival has launched a lot of careers. You can go to a Beyonce concert, and I can say, yeah, they did their first digital graffiti in 2016, you know, but all the graphics behind Beyonce will be that someone has done. So it's a real thing. So this little area has got a lot of emerging artists. I just think this is part of your job in curating this, is to be careful and kind to the community that comes, to all the different participants, to the different spectrum of interests. And, you know, it could be a kid who's just like, that's so cool. And it could be someone who wants to, you know, look at Curator's notes, which are on the app, and go find out a little bit more about the work. And, you know, all that, everything we do is a cue to the imagination. And when you can do that for a weekend and you can turn the environment over to that, I think that's a really virtuous, you know, sort of cycle, because it's, if you do it properly, I think it's self-renewing.
Again, it's always intimidating to talk after John because he knows so much about this. But I was going to say, when I talk to people about digital graffiti, people always say to me, oh, yes, so Alys, you have just flat white walls. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Our architecture is very sculptural. It's subtractive. And so it is, to me, a beautiful thing to be able to see how the different artists and how John and his team actually almost like curate the pieces to the architecture. So it's wonderful sometimes to see how a piece is going to fold and, you know, envelop maybe a recessed stoop like this, or it actually goes and climbs onto a wall or rotates around a chimney top. So it's part of the beauty of this festival, to me, is really the merging of the art with the architecture of Alys Beach, because it's so funny when I have to tell people, no, we're not. They're like, oh, you're putting screens up. No, you just have flat white walls. No, it's being done very cohesively and comprehensively.
So let's take a walk down to the fire pit, and we'll stop at one place on the way. As you go through, there are two sort of long passages that work. There's this road and there's North Charles, so you can sort of explore both, and there's a little joinery between those, and one along McGee as well. So it's kind of like a figure eight in this part of the precinct, and then we go past guest services and do a loop around to the pool. So there's a structure, but it's a little free-flowing in terms of how you experience this. We've put some works in these areas, and part of this is to activate these areas. This is a long landscape aspect. It's a wide aspect work called Organica, and it's based on different elements sort of circulating through each other refractively, and it's got a large displaced object in the middle. So it's like if you can imagine that a evolving slide of some living matter was mixed with a Grateful Dead concert in slow-mo, that's about where you're at. So it's hard to articulate what these things look like, but you'll notice them when you come through, and you'll see the kind of different placements. We have a more technical work here, but the one I really want to talk about. So you'll come to this spot, and this is again how you work with the artist and the architecture. Katina Bitskis has been working with us for a very long time. Fabulous artist, fabulous mentor to students. She's teaching at Mizzou, and she's moving to Indiana. She and Scott is a sort of works with media archives and what I would call sort of decaying media materials and processes. And Katina works a lot with personal memory and the way that you structure the collection of memories and the collections of sense impressions through your own artifacts, your own ephemera, photography, family films, and you can produce a document which speaks to this. This work, Cellulose Documents, combines two things. It's portraits of women who are encoded on these old cellulose film negatives, and they are in a state of decomposition because the cellulose, which was historically used, is essentially unstable. And so there's this idea that the portraits being displayed, they're mixed with microscopy that examines the chemical structure of cellulose. So there's the archive of these images and cellulose itself, which form this kind of ode to decomposition. It's really beautiful. Some of the times you'll see two images in the same frame, and she hasn't put them there digitally. They're actually stuck together because the film stock that they're on is so friable that it's actually melted the two images together. So she's using the naturally occurring superimpositions that happens through the process of decomposition, and the fact that these memories or these recordings are becoming lost just because of the passage of time. The idea that the image is somewhat permanent, but is not. It's in this constant state of decomposition that is put up across this wall. And if you see it on the desktop, you see it as a movie, you're like, that's really good. And you see it here at scale, and it's a completely different experience. It's very moving. Soundtrack, which they made, is composed of little hurdy-gurdies, her grandmother's voice. They're playing violin, a theremin, which is one of those spooky hand-activated, makes the horror film sort of sounds. All of these things are mixed together to produce this roving soundtrack. So the whole piece, when you see it, it's a very gentle piece, but it's a meditation on this idea of imaging and loss, how we store memories, how that, time moves past. And by revitalizing them and bringing them back into this contemporary form, it's something very different. Now, one of the questions for this is, where do we place it? And so Katina and I had a dialogue, and I have drone footage and photos of most of this area. And so, I'm actually in Sydney at the moment, so I'll be like, oh gosh, 16J, look at the map, look at the drone footage. I'll be like, oh, that's the one with the grey shutters. Yes, I've got a photo somewhere. I go through this archive, and I'll say, how about this? That looks good. And so we'll talk about placement, we'll talk about scale, because some of the works are great at a bigger scale, some of them are good at a smaller scale. And so you want this sense of difference as you move through. It's not just like, here are the things. But by expanding something that you would see through her production process, and this is a big thing about projection, when you do things larger than the human body, we respond to them differently. People say, I like to go to cinema, I like to see the movies because I like to be around people. I think that's BS. Okay, I hate being around people. I don't want to hear them opening their crackers, slurping their gulpy, all of that. It's like, I'm never happier than when I walk into a giant cinema and it's empty and I can sit right in the middle. It's like my living room. So what I think we love that experience is the scale, because when you see a face and it's 40 feet wide, it's not a face, it's another idea of a face. We respond to things in terms of how they relate to our physical size and our presence. That effect is amplified in projection. So this is something about the architecture. It encourages a kind of narrowing through here. And so that subtle movement of the buildings in, when you do something at scale, which covers this entire wall, it becomes more immediate and it's more sensed. And this is a second thing. When I have been at festivals for the longest time, the three words I've heard over on repeat are, that's so cool. Now, that's not that those are the wrong words, but that's the words we're trying to use to describe something which we don't really have a language for. It's just, that's cool. I'm sort of speechless, but I'll try and make some words. And I think that one of the big things to think about is this sense of embodied emotion, which we would call affect. So when we have the experience of grief, when we have the experience of love, when we have these kind of embodied emotions, but they're very much felt in our system, these are affects, and they're hard to describe, and it's very hard to be precise about what they are. One of the big things about projection is it produces an affective experience. You come into an encounter with this, and you see the faces, and it does something. And if you were asked to describe it, you'd be trying to go to a different domain, which is to describe images and effects and semantic relationships. This image means this, which it sort of moves a little bit past that. So this is, I think, as you go around the festival, seeing that sense of affect, that sense of how things affect you in the body, through proximity, but it goes a little bit beyond words, and it's very hard to take it away with you. And I think that, combined with the ephemeral nature of the projection, makes you feel on a really fundamental level that it's special to be here, that you're having this very unique moment. There's this kind of excessive input, and it's hard to describe because it's just outside of words. So, I think that's a really good way to talk about this, because the kind of sensation that it produces and the curiosity that produces, for all of these reasons, there's an entire, I guess, theory or idea about how the work's made, but the work itself speaks to you as an encounter, as something which is, completely different in your normal experience of walking down the street.
And I know that I come from a place that, I'm fortunate enough to live here, but I work here, I live here, so it's very immersive for me all the time, and it's very emotional. I thought yesterday walking through, there was a touch point on when John was describing a lot of the words, a lot of the artists and their work, he was just using the word humanity a lot, and I remember thinking, gosh, we need that more than ever right now. It's just a connection on so many different levels. It's really emotional, but what an enhanced aspect of the beauty for me of digital graffiti is walking through the pedestrian path versus walking through the street. The experiences are very different. Mm-hmm. Here you have, as John was describing, you have moments of compression and then moments when it opens up and you're experiencing the art differently. You're going to be, in some areas, you're going to be able to get up very, very close to it. Others are really more appreciated from a little bit of distance, and even then you may be seeing through the lens of a tree. And I love that. I love that it's not the same experience everywhere. We're not in some big convention center where the art may be really, really good, but it's kind of the same experience. And as John was describing, even being in a movie, this is so personal and nobody should really care about this, but I always go crazy when I see a piece of art that I really like and I want to go find out about it and it says untitled. Because for me, I want to know, what was the artist thinking? What was the motivation? And I respect it when people say untitled, they don't want to say anything, but I love nothing more than being able to hear from the artists or in the description. The app is also really good. I want to encourage people to do that and to tell all the women to wear flat shoes, because everybody does this and it's completely normal, but we have these beautiful 60 million year old. Sometimes some of the coral and the stone here, it's very old, and so it's not a perfectly even surface, and we don't want anybody to get injured.
Let's go to the fire pit.
I always love seeing what John actually puts in this corner, because this is a really important little public green in Alys. It's at the kind of intersection of it's our very first, this was our very first pedestrian path. This was our very first green. And, this was designed after the homes were in place. The beauty about being able to do that, we were able to be very episodic and look at where the entries were. So we made connections where it mattered. But this is an area where you have a house here that is kind of at an angle. It's got this very manicured hedge, and there's been sometimes projections on that wall, which is really phenomenal. But this is a key place for me in Alys, because it is the intersection of multiple different avenues, and it's always just very interesting to linger. Even around this little corner, there's always a little jewel. So make sure you don't miss anything.
Marieanne's right. This is a really convivial place. You can come here any time of the year and there'll be people relaxing there, just talking, playing with their kids. So it invites that sense, and particularly in DG, as it opens up, it invites that sense of lingering, of a little bit of chit-chat. David Bennett from Nashville, Tennessee, put your hand up, David, so people, is doing a resident artist who is treating this building and this one as a mixed piece. So these two link and the two pieces are drawn together. And David's work is very deliberative. We had a long discussion about this the other night, but he spends, I've seen him mapping, and he is, cutting out, there's a tiny bit of light there, cut it, for hours. Very deliberate about how things are applied to the surface, but also about his works. Incredibly vibrant, incredibly moving, but you'll see these constant shifts in pattern language, different depths, different kinds of elements that when you see them, they're all very, very carefully chosen, and none of them are easy to do. So there's a great sense of craft and also of processing of the image, and you get this incredible tapestry. So this is kind of an anchor piece in this precinct. And down here, you've got three pieces. There's one called Circle Game, as we come in on the wall. And it's very much like Organica. It's almost that taken to its graphical extreme. It's circles which are applied in a kind of combination to the circles behind, and they move in XY directions. Very, very simple movement, but the overlapping and recombination of the circles produces this really mesmeric pattern. We come past that, and Paul Boyle has a piece up on the wall, which is satellite image of the deforestation of the Amazon, and it's all in green, and it goes between a large frame and something which looks like a contact sheet. But these images, you see them and you make out that they're landscape, and you see them turn into farmland. So there's this kind of archival use of satellite imagery of the same locations to produce this constant sense of change in that very kind of fragile ecological area of the earth. And on this side, Hannah Ford from Savannah has produced an image called Haunted House, and it's incredibly simple. It looks like someone has ripped apart as if the wall was made of stucco, and there are 2 holes, and you look into the wall and you can see these spaces which there's light moving around, there's a gentle play of things, ambience in the air, but it's the idea of building a wall within a wall, or building within a wall, building a sort of a fake kind of oculus into the space. So that's very, very subtle, quite gentle, but very lovely to see it applied to the wall. We have Mr. Gray, Pink Cloud Studio from Montreal here, and this is a really interesting piece, very interactive, very expressive. So it uses a technology called stable diffusion in real time, and you are tracked by a Kinect, which is, some people might be familiar from Dance Dance Revolution, right? So if you can imagine that thing which picks up the skeleton of your body, sends it into a software called Touch Designer. In real time, he uses a set of very carefully trained artificial intelligence algorithms. There are 6 different modes, I think, so you will become a cactus, or maybe an alien, or maybe a painting in real time. And you can move your arms, and the shape in front of you will grow. You become a sort of digital alter ego. So 2 or 3 people can be in there at the same time. The sense of it will track you. And one of the things we try to do, especially for the last few years, is to produce in this little vestibule a kind of interactive gathering spot, something where particularly kids will go in and say, wow, that's so fun, because these works are at such scale, but those works are very intimate and they allow you to do something with the work. So it's about diversifying that experience. To that point, the bench on the right, we call that the Instagram bench, and there are two like key Instagram spots as I see them. One is around on the backside of the lake, and one is there. So this year we have a beautiful piece, Stefani Bird. It's called True Love, and it just tracks 2 bald eagles. And I don't know, I wasn't aware of this, but they lock claws when mating, and they form a death spiral. The 2 birds cycle in this spiral towards the ground, and they'll release before they hit. And they'll do it again and again and again. And it's a kind of really prosaic mating ritual where those birds are going to engage in this almost terrifyingly precarious behavior as a way of affirming their connection. Now, they don't always unlock. Birds plummet to their death. So it's not a trivial kind of activity, but this is incredibly poetic. And she has just looped this footage of the eagles in this spiral in a large circular image, which is up on the wall. So that's, to me, that's a really interesting piece. And again, I come back to this idea of a cue to the imagination. When I looked at the work and I started thinking about bald eagles, I was like, wow, what a thing. What a thing to be, part of, to see your body in front of it, to take a photo with that. So that's placed there. And then there's a lovely piece from MS Manglia. It's called Solchi, and it's a body drawn, and it's on the chimney opposite. And so you'll see this drawn body, and it moves slowly through these different versions of the same body. And it's a work which is very subtle. People see it and they're like, oh, that's beautiful. But also it extends time in an interesting way, because it's in this very gentle space between the still image and the moving image. And I think things like that, which take you back into a very slow contemplation, it's not a still, but it's close enough to a still that it sort of lowers even watching it for a few seconds, you start to change the pace of your apprehension, because a lot of work is very vibrant, a lot of work moves quickly, and this is something which encourages a different sort of sensibility. So because it approaches but doesn't exactly reach the still drawing. These, and they're very delicately outlined bodies that sort of morph from one to the other. There's this constantly evolving human shape, larger than us, of course, up on the chimney, and I think it's a really beautiful work. I love the placement.
Again, I'm always finding myself wanting to build on what John says, but just in some ways, just like the architecture and the urbanism here, there are moments of, maybe your eye may be automatically drawn to a beautiful element, but there's a lot of time and effort spent composing the overall street. So we tell architects all the time, don't put all of your bells and whistles on the front, because we are about composing streets. And so keep some in the back. What is really beautiful and what never ceases to amaze me year after year, and Kelly alluded to this, how everything's been getting so much more sophisticated, having those quiet moments of relief, just like John described, is so nice. Because of course, digital graffiti sometimes is an inclination. It's very natural to be drawn to what's bright and very vivid. And the Panasonic projectors this year are just nothing short of phenomenal. It's extraordinary. Having seen, like Kelly was talking about, having seen the evolution, it's friggin' amazing. But having those moments where there may be a quieter piece, I just want to encourage people not to just walk past it, because just like those moments are really key for good architecture and urbanism, it's also really wonderful to be able to pause and have those moments where it is just calmer, but there's just as much thought and just as much effort that's gone into creating the piece and into finding the perfect place to curate it for the location.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, because I think there's so many careful uses of verticals in, or things above a sight line in Alys Beach, where you have kind of tower structures or other things which stretch up. And to me, this chimney is typical of that very intentional kind of intercession in the built form, where it stands out, but it also blends in. And it's the sort of thing you can pass by and not really think about it. So putting a work there, it's like a gentle call to come back to the architecture all the time. And that's, Marieanne and I talk about this a lot, but it's that whole idea of it's art and architecture, and they're not fighting. They're in this new kind of momentary symbiosis where they're kind of building on each other. So I love it. Let's go up to North Charles. We have a food service here this year. Sometimes we put works in here, sometimes not. But when we look at the programming of the entire space, we don't just think about, well, I want the projection to go here, I want this. We're working with the events team to think about how we produce a sort of total experience. And if you want one kind of vector which describes that, it's power. Having enough power for everything, outlets. It may seem like, there's a plug somewhere. No, there's not. So I can assure you there are, probably 10 people all week just wrangling power around the place. But this is, again, it's that sort of thing where we love this bamboo alley. It's a very intentional sort of pathway through to that other part of Alys Beach, but we wanted it to be somewhere which sort of fed the conviviality of this space, and people could, food or drink, it's available here. And we think about those things, not just, the projection or not just the path. It's a kind of total experience. So hopefully that can be something you can appreciate on the weekend. One of the spots we like to treat, it's almost like a given, is this small fountain. Because again, as we've gone through this very open convivial space, people then start to move, and they can start to move quite quickly through here. So maybe they think, I'll get to the next thing, because that opening invites you to slow, and maybe when it closes a little bit, you start to speed up. So quite often we have something here, and sometimes it's interactive, so people will stop and play with it or get a sense of something that they can do. But we're really interested in this becoming not a stopping point, but more like a spot to, okay, there's something else to see. I want to see what's going on. And these little alcoves are just as important as the big spaces on buildings, because you do then create a variation in terms of scale, in terms of the intimacy of the work. So that's something to look out for. You'll see that a couple of times in this next stretch. When we open out slightly, we get a much bigger, what I call a bigger read on this area. And so there are 3 works here. Cody Sampson's Mutual States was produced for Vivid in Sydney last year. So it was a kind of a big commissioned work, and he's brought it to Digital Graffiti this year. But it's a beautiful painted collage of people's faces. And so this whole wall is like a moving painting of humanity. It's a really lovely piece. It's quite slow and elegant, but people also express in this painted form this incredible variety of emotion. So you see people relaxed, you see people in anguish, you see people laughing, and it's a kind of fond speculation on what it is to be a person. Like that idea of humanity, that was really the sort of impetus of the whole piece. So I love the idea that you would see it here and it would paint right across. This is a lovely surface to work with. Mandy Stanton, who is from California and was a competitive synchronized swimmer for many years, has produced an underwater film, and it's very much inspired by her love of the weightlessness of water. So she was, obviously synchronized swimming is incredibly detailed and athletic in that context, but this film, Hold Your Breath, is a series of women's bodies floating in the water and occasionally carrying a mirror ball through these sort of lit pools of light. So it's taking her passion for that experience and turning it into a very lyrical sort of layered exploration of the body in that weightless state. And so those figures just drift very, very subtly across this wall. It's a nice piece. As we get to North Charles, we have a sort of dual question. In terms of staging an event, we look at North Charles as being a gathering spot where people want to stop for a minute. Maybe they want to get something at a bar. On Saturday night, there'll be food trucks here because people get hungry. So we're very conscious of how to modulate the show and make this a space in which people can enjoy that aspect, the convivial aspect of the festival, without being herded towards something. Luke Hildreth's work here, incredible audio reactive piece which mixes projection and lasers and voice input. So you can walk up to a microphone, give it a number of, you could say butterfly or UFO, and it will produce a UFO traced by a laser. So there are a number of commands that the piece will speak to. It's really interesting, and he's sort of got this whole fascination with how you deconstruct that idea of our relationship with machines into more playful kind of expressive modes. So he's built a very definitive system, but it's one which allows you to kind of explore with wonder this sort of novel sense of interface. We all talk to Siri, but it's like talking to the internet, you know, into Wikipedia. And Luke's done something quite different because it's very structured, but also the image that comes back is very playful and unique. So it's worth kind of seeing that. And this is where we start to make this a little bit sometimes more playful, this area where you have these big pieces. However, Austin Shaw's piece here is hitting the corner of the building, and it's coming from the other side. You can see that projector on the truss. But this is matte. So two things about the work. One, it's bookended, so we hit the corner of the building and then we pin it because the projection spins out, but we actually pin it to the sides of the building so that it's folded as if the building was a book, which has two halves of the piece. Also importantly for Austin's work is that he's a professional motion designer, but his personal work is sort of exploring microscopy and looking at text under microscopes and then slicing it, and he looks at the pixels on a screen and does what's called slit scanning of those. So he produces these very specific image effects. So all of the work is this kind of deconstruction of the commercial processes that, I mean, he works for like HBO and, you know, big companies like that, Anthropology, Ralph Lauren, but he's taking this kind of investigative practice where he takes that commercial labor and turns it into something very unique. So it's almost like seeing this building as a giant book or a giant screen. It's sort of oscillating between these two forms. And so this is sort of a nice way of turning this, as you look back, you get something, not just the look down the alley, but you get this one edifice which sort of addresses North Charles. Now, importantly, as we come out here, I'll call this a horizontal read. So one of the things is this opens up. It's a very functional thoroughfare within the Alys Beach precinct. It has these parking spaces, so they'll be occupied by sometimes food trucks, sometimes food and beverage stations, sometimes sofas. So there's an invitation to sit and enjoy this space as a respite. At this end, on the far corner, you'll see there'll be a work by Fumi Ito, a Japanese artist who works with children's drawings, and she makes these really beautiful pieces which everyone just so loves. And it's displayed at massive scale across the building, so you get this very beautiful bright read of Fumi's work in that direction. So Colette is mapped right across the three buildings, and we build a template for that, which is a kind of outline of the building, of the roof lines and the divisions between the spaces. It's 3 HD projectors stitched together, and we send the template out to schools, to universities, and the students are able to do their work to that template. And they upload it, we collate them, put them into a program. And so last night we split it into 3 bits, map the outlines to the building, and then we replace the outlines with the actual programs that the students have made. So that's an incredibly vibrant space. To give you an example, this is like a 10,000 lumen projector, which will cover this building quite well. There's 60,000 on that, so 3 20,000 lumen projectors, which are large. You know, they're 300 pounds. So they're on scaffold. This year, Panasonic, because we've been working with them for a long time, sponsored us for the Della in the town centre. And they said, what do you want? We said, we want 3 31,000 lumen projectors. They, oh, we can do that. Like, all right, nice. So just to give you a sort of nerdy backstory, that's $500,000 with the lenses sitting on the deck there, 90,000 lumens across the building. And it's a lot of light. So I think they also came to us and said, well, we'll send some technicians down and they can help you. And we're like, we got this. They're like, what? We've been doing it for a long time. And they're like, oh, okay. It was unusual for them because usually they want to send a tech team to sort of get things up. But we said, no, I think we can do this. So, you know, and most of the artists here, I can tell you from having worked with people, you know, worked with Nico before, worked with George, they know what's going on. We can have a discussion back and forth, and people are very technically competent. So, you know, it's nice to see that they want to help, but it's also nice to feel we don't need that much help in terms of staging, because we've come to a point with the experience and the maturity of the festival that we can explore some of these surfaces and explore some of these spaces. Just to that point, when I came in March, it was an idea to do Della, to do the town centre. And so I said, look, give me a battery and a little kind of desktop projector and a laptop stand. And I went out at night with an outline, which I think we got from Marieanne's office. We got the outline of the building. I cut off a third of it. I sort of went halfway up the area, pointed the projector, projected this white outline, and then just notched it into place so it ran down the columns. And I'm like, okay, this can work. Yeah, that's good. And so that sort of proof of concept made me confident that everything else we could do would actually work out there. Now, when we sit back, it's in the bandstand, and I'm like, you know, if we're going to have these expensive projectors, it might be nice to have some cover. I can't tell you the ulcers that rain produces for us. You know, the scramble to cover projectors, and you all know the Florida rain, it can be a little bit capricious. 1 minute it's sunny, then you've got 10 minutes of cyclonic downpour, and then it's back to sunny. It's like that 10 minutes is really critical. So we thought we'll put them in the bandstand, and interestingly enough, the projectors, you have to work out the lens. What sort of lens are we going to use? And I used satellite imagery from Google to measure the distance between the bandstand and the building, the width of the building, flipped it up to work out how far it was diagonally across what a projector would. And I said we needed 2.8 to 4.7 lens. That's the zoom range that will hit the building. So everything's, in that sense, is quite precise. You know, we choose the lenses, we choose the projectors very specifically because everything is done with a kind of intentional purpose. But I thought it was funny that I was figuring out with Google Maps what would go up on the building. So as we come through, this again, all of this very convivial, people can stop, you can wander around that way, you can go down this path. This, you'll see a little LED program on the path, and this is kind of interesting because we put the LEDs in this year, and we wanted to do something at floor level, which was going to give you a little bit of a sense of passage and activate that path. And previously we've had things like lit floors and things like that, but we wanted it to be like almost like when you come in with aircraft. I don't know if you've seen aircraft landing at night and they have that thing going down the runway, like this is the way. It's a little bit like that, but it's synced with a soundtrack. So there'll be sound there, and it's actually a video file, which is colored stripes running across. And those 2 strips of LEDs pick up the colored stripes and replay them. So these are kind of like 2 lines on a TV screen, playing a video file. And it's playing off the same kind of players that we use in a lot of the rest of the sort of precinct. So it's a very simple setup, but it's, again, it's not like oh, it's preset, disco preset or something. It's actually a program which is designed to do something to enhance that space and to use lighting as a cue to sort of move through that next passage into the next part of the festival. So let's go up to the cherry trees. This is a really interesting area. It's quite transitional in that this was construction a year ago, and it was kind of cinder blocks 2 years ago. So we've programmed different works here. 2 years ago, Shuan, one of our regular artists, produced the work and projected across. Last year, Yandel Walton from Australia did a sort of, it's called Gaussian splatting, but it's like point clouds which define 3D objects. So these 3D points, and it was traversing through a forest. And these kind of ephemera, consumerist ephemera like Coke cans and, chip wrappers, all these things floated at the end towards you as you traveled through this forest. And that was projected on the half-finished structure. This was not anything. This was scrub forest, and we used to use this wall quite frequently as a sort of sight line, but that's not available to us because everything changes. And so this year, Emmett Leven's piece is recordings that he did on just a trip home one night, and it has a lot of leaves. It's like a sort of layered line of sight impression of what it was to walk home at night in black and white. And it actually works beautifully on this wall. So full scale, you'll sometimes see the leaves, this projector, the outline of the leaves up on the wall, and it feels like it's kind of very synchronous. There's a really nice sense of just light, not color, but just light hitting this space. And it's acknowledging the presence of the trees, which are now growing as part of that transitional period of the space. It's really a way of sort of integrating this idea of walking at night in this space, in this transitional space. So again, it's quite intentional what's been placed here, but it worked better than I thought. When I saw it here, I was like, oh, that's really good. I had hopes, but I was pleasantly surprised. And you'll notice on this side, we have some Polish artists who produce a 15-minute animation. Much of it is just done with sand. So they do stop motion and they paint by rearranging grains of sand into these elaborate, stop motion animations. It's absolutely spectacular, and it's spread across. It's sort of book-leaved on that corner, and quite often there are two halves, and it goes right down the alleyway and right across this face. So it's really interesting to sort of stop. It's a kind of massive surplus of, I don't think you can see the show in a night because there's too much stuff. So I think that's good, right? But there's just this kind of incredible surplus. And that, to me, this piece is one of those things where you see so much labor and so much care put into it. It's really kind of quite humbling to see it here and to see them offering it as something to be experienced. Let's go towards the lake. Before we come to the actual, the cherry orchard, as we call it, and the small bridge, there's this gentle opening again. So we've gone through that passage, and there's this kind of almost constriction, and it opens up a little bit. We get this widening of the path as it approaches the steps. And this section has a very large exposed, the shutters, the white. It's a great surface for projection. Katie's piece is up here this year. Look for it. It's very beautiful. It's called In Flow, and it starts with a little bird, but it actually starts with this almost like molecular forms, which you could imagine the egg at the beginning of life, sort of starting to gestate, and then it opens up. There's a little bird, and there's a series of beautiful patterns which incorporate. There are two motifs. There are birds and flowers. So there's this constant sense of life and rejuvenation, but the patterning of it frequently evokes mandalas. There are these kind of kaleidoscopic, brightly colored patterns, and there's a concept in Hindu practice called the yantra, and the yantra is a rhythmic arrangement in that sort of radial pattern, which is designed for contemplation. So when you meditate, if you meditate on a yantra, you will produce a particular outcome with the meditation, because the yantra is designed to bring in the kind of, the wavelength of that thing. It could be prosperity, it could be peace, whatever it is. The yantra is a particular device. And so for me, this is really interesting because it's got this lively motif, a single bird and then series of birds in this constant flow across the piece and this constantly evolving mandala. It's very colorful and it feels like it's come from this gestation, this small moment of life beginning, and then it's produced this incredible generative efflorescence right across the wall, and then it goes back to darkness and then opens again. And so it's this constant cyclical renewal of life. Beautiful piece, colorful, really vibrant, and we wanted people to come through here and just stop for a minute and go like, oh wow, okay, I feel that. However, there will be a little noise. So as we come down here, this space we've treated, there are 3 pieces here. Kamal Ghosrami's Shambles, which is a kind of AI piece which moves between these kind of almost brightly hot lit isometric forms, and as you go through them they kind of devolve to show you these wolves lurking in the shadows. It's the idea that what we imagine to be the structure of things is actually a hot mess, full of danger and full of threat. Caleb Sweeney, who has this year graciously turned off his audio, but he's painted this entire tower with this lyrical flow of stained glass windows. So traveling through Europe, he photographed stained glass windows in churches, and he's produced a kind of living, breathing pillar of these windows which open and close across the surface. So it's almost like there's a little bit of disco back here, and there's actually disco here. So Nicola, say hi, resident artist, this is our second residency piece, has produced what I can only say is a staggering, technically accomplished mapping of this entire area. And there's a live VJ performance where you will not only have hot disco tunes, but the entire surface is projected and will break apart and recombine in real time. Things come out of the windows, the building shapes, very, very precisely handled, offer this constantly shifting series of perspectives. And I can only say, was it 2 nights ago, there were a group of girls came in and they were like, oh my God, it's Disneyland. No, it's better than Disneyland. So, you know, the response has been pretty fantastic. And I think by this stage, everyone will have 2, maybe 3 drinks. And I expect this to be like the first party. We think it's a great space to open up. And really, it does invite that sense of pausing for a moment and opening up. But I think this will be a really fun space once we move to this part of the next part of the walk before we open out to the lake. So just kind of prepping you for that. But this is definitely, I can say watch for it, but you're not going to have to watch for it. It definitely announces itself. So we'll head this side of the...
Okay, John just asked me to talk a little bit about, this is called Lake Maryland. Lake Maryland and Somerset Bridge. The master planner, this lake was not part of the very original design charrette. And the master planner one day was talking to Eric and I, my husband, and he said to us, you know, we're leaning into everything that's sustainable at Alys. We have to continue that way. I don't care if you convert frog piss into something, but I want a windmill, and you need to make use of the windmill. So, okay, that's part number 1. We ended up with an engineer, designing a lake here on the northern part of the property. There is a direct line to the Gulf of Mexico, and you have the bridge that's right there that is a true south-facing tower. So we have a sundial because it's true south-facing, but it terminates the axes all the way from the Gulf all the way to the preserve. And we have about 7 wells that are from Alys Beach that discharge into this lake. And we realized we wanted to use the lake for irrigation, and we realized that there's a lot of natural ions in the water. And the iron was creating yellow stains on our white architecture. So we added a windmill that operates a pump that aerates the water. The ions settle to the bottom of the lake, the clear water rises, and this water then is used to irrigate a lot of the common areas in Alys Beach. We also have a sustainable and edible landscape program. So around we planted blueberries, 3 different species, no chemicals or anything, so people can come and then you can pick at them and eat them. And we do. Around the perimeter is ornamental peanut, which is a beautiful green ground cover where little yellow flowers sprout in the late spring, early summer. And we had to tell our owners, what's beautiful about ornamental peanut is that after a couple of years, it needs no irrigation. Groundwater and rain is enough. And so it goes dormant in the winter, which means it goes a little bit brown. But our owners now know, don't worry, it's not dead. It's going to come back in the spring, and it's a sustainable way of doing designing this. And it's going to be very hard to explain, but the origin of Lake Maryland, you have to see north of the bridge is another portion that is more organic. Here it's a little bit more structured. And when the engineer had kind of drawn this loose shape on paper, my husband took it and he outlined in red Marilyn Monroe. It was a perfect for her. The bridge was her belt. She was holding a martini cup, and Lake Maryland came about because of that. It was inspiration from. But so this is a really, I think, a beautiful intersection of sustainability and architecture and art. Right at the base of the very first fire pit, where we had the fire pit, we have an alley that has a lemon tree and a plant of mint, and so we call that Mojito Alley. We have Daiquiri Row. We have the soup garden where we switch out spices, thyme and mint and rosemary and sage. And so again, owners, guests are encouraged to come and kind of pick. We would send out our daughters all the time, and they grew up here and they got to know what was what. They would come back, is this basil? Nope, that's sage. Go back, and they would go back and pick at it. So it's just part of a lot of the different elements that are woven in that we try to be kind of quiet about it, but it's noticeable. And we had fun with this fountain. There's just a turned copper pipe. It's really cool when it freezes and you see the water do this, and it's like that, and then you see the stalactites or whatever. It's really fun.
We've got a little reversal on the back of the bridge. So this has a piece, Ru Yang's from China, has a piece called the roving eye, the bouncing eye, and it's an eye which looks around. It's evoking the DVD logo that used to bounce around the screen when you're in the screensaver on your DVD. It's sort of picking up on that trope, but in fact it's the eye which looks outwards at the audience. So that's sort of cut into this, and we didn't want it to interfere with Nicola's work by throwing projection up. So there are scallops which are kind of burnt into the image, and then we output the image to the media card and conform it to the resolution of the projector, but it's kind of on a black background, which very much maps it exactly to this space. So it's kind of quite intentional about how it's put here and how it works. And then we get this series. At the end, the bridge is George Berlin. Where's George? There he is. Fabulous piece, like incredibly uplifting, precisely mapped. And George and I we've worked together before at DG. I said, look, I want to make this as easy as possible for you. And I set the projector that we were testing with in March on the side of, because it's very stable, the conversation pit is very stable for projectors. And so I set it in position and I pointed it to cover the bridge. So I saw from the projector's point of view, what it would see, what it would cover, and then I built a template outlining the bridge, packaged that and sent it to George and said, that's the view. And I don't know, how long did it take when we got here?
Like 10 minutes. Yeah.
10 minutes. So we put it up, we put little, like a mesh on the we pick the points, and we're like, oh, put that there, that's good. And then it plays. So we can replace the template with the work that he's made, and then it plays exactly to the bridge. So it's very carefully conformed, but it's a long discussion. It's like some months. You'll see that with Fiat LVX at the end of the last house, or second last house towards the end, is an amazing, they're a studio from Montreal who explore how existing buildings could be reimagined with AI. And it's a fabulous piece. It just cycles through this series of kind of Baroque imaginings of what that building could be, which are all superimposed back onto the building. So it's like the building itself transforming in front of your eyes through a variety of forms. It's a really, really cool piece. And this is a big thing. There's a lot of AI in the show, and people say, oh, is that not like, digital tools remove some labor, right? Photoshop removes some labor. Editing systems. I started editing by pulling pieces of film out of a flatbed, cutting them, putting tape across them, putting them back in, pressing play. An edit took you a couple of minutes. And if you're very fast, you could get through it in about 30 seconds. But editing was not boom, boom, boom. So every new tool speeds up, changes, modulates process. One of the larger things about AI in our current condition is that there's an enormous amount of interest about it and what it can do, and it's certainly working in image making to streamline the creation of social media products or other sorts of fairly mundane visual experiences. And what we're particularly interested in is how artists use AI as a tool to speculate or transform and to produce an interrogation of what the image is by critically questioning how AI operates. And there's a lot of work that does that in the show. Tracy Miller Robbins, who's on the back of the show, has hand drawings which are passed through AI algorithms, but you see the kind of back end of what they do to the image. And it's a really beautiful piece. It's the third one in a series called Women. This one is called Seen, Stored and Remembered. And it's very much commenting on the way women's images are used as a kind of commodity, and the fact that there's this industrial process in how they might be transformed by technology. And in a sense, it's unmasking that. They're very much like this series of Turin shrouds on the building. It's kind of an impression of the face rather than the face itself. And so by using the tools in this way, people are unpacking them in all sorts of different ways and interrogating, okay, what does this really do? What sort of value does it create? How has it changed in the way we think? At the end of this, a building that hasn't been done before, as we come through the path, Michael Betancourt's work is across the whole building to the left, and it's called Haunted Landscape. And it uses a famous film from film history, Skeleton Dance, which is an old stop motion animation. And he opens a digital copy of this historic film, takes out parts of the code to create a kind of disassembled digital artifact. So it looks like a series of colored squares, and it's got this hint or this image of the skeleton in the background. But Betancourt's practice, and he's very involved in this theoretical use of glitch and these kinds of processes, is to take an image and to question its provenance, because for him the digital image proposes that it's always perfect. It can always infinitely reproduce. It can produce value without intervention. Once you make a JPEG and it's on a website, then it can conceivably get more likes, more hits. There's this implicit notion of value that operates without our intervention, unlike other forms of labor which require us to go out and do things. And Betancourt's unmasking that a little bit by showing the friability of the digital image, by accelerating its own decomposition. And interestingly, his work is very much interested in this concept of, in this work, of hauntology. It's from a critical theorist, Mark Fisher, who passed away in 2014 in the UK. But he introduced this idea that our entire culture is haunted by the past. Not directly, but by these images, these sort of decomposed images of the past, which we don't really completely understand, but they're with us nonetheless. And so it's an interesting concept, just where language exists, just where memory exists, and just where the cultural imagination is allowed to continue. So Betancourt takes this kind of famous aspect of film history and paints it across the whole building as this brightly coloured, slowly moving canvas of glitch. And in the background, the skeletons are still dancing. It's a really interesting piece. So, some of these things have this immense kind of theoretical. Betancourt's written like 20 books on, critical theory, media history. He's a total axe. And David's nodding. We've had many conversations as I think he's been here for 3 years. But fascinating stuff when you see the artists. And look, if you don't have the DG app, there's just a few curator's notes on all the different pieces. So it gives you a sense of, what you can see, and you can always just look in there and do a little bit of a secondary walking tour with that. So let's go up to the conversation pit. So this part of the lake, I think it's really beautiful, the intentionality of the way that these two paths open up and offer you different perspectives on your passage. You kind of pick a fork in the road and make your way up. You can join around, you can circumnavigate. There are many ways to address the lake. George's piece kind of bookending, standing very proudly at the end. And then as you come down, you'll see a Fiat LVX on this building, and you'll see Xuan has a piece on here which is incredibly subtle. It's based on glacial melt. So it's actually light going through melting ice. And it's like a very slow moving, it's almost ambient, the piece, but it's right across that hole, and you'll just see the color of the light come out. You'll see the luminance pull out of the background. So it's a very subtle piece. These pieces are incredibly vibrant, and we wanted to bookend because somehow it's become this sense of a viewing gallery along here, because we asked people to perambulate on this side, but oh, what about here? So this year, the last building, we've got a group, one of them grew up in this area, and they live in Cincinnati currently, Backbeat Motion, and they've produced a work. You can see the projector there. It's covering this entire building, and they've built a custom MIDI controller where you can control the projection with these knobs and dials. So if you're a kid, you can come and I got control of this, and it's right across the surface. So it's sort of asking you to come through this section, turn around, and their interface for that is up on the bridge, so you don't have to wander off the path, but it's asking you to sort of turn and think again, what's happening back here? And in this way, we're trying to create like a little bit of a differential bookend here, where these different things are not only capping and sort of enclosing this end of the lake, which is really this opening of space and these really large vistas, these beautiful architectural surfaces, but we're asking the audience to sort of, once they've left this, to turn around for a moment and maybe see over their shoulder, this idea of look back or look at what you've seen. And that also picks up the sight lines of the two projections on the buildings at this end of the sort of street here. Betancourt on that side, and Christiana Grigorieva from Russia, who's kind of totally new age, and there are these giant speculative figures. I don't know how to describe them, but if you mixed Indian mysticism with science fiction, you'd be somewhere in the ballpark. And so I think there's this interesting dialogue between Betancourt's, they're both incredibly colorful. Hers is sort of almost like speculative, shamanistic science fiction, and here's this speculative historical deconstruction and media deconstruction. So there's a kind of interesting dialogue between these two pieces, one which is very portrait and one which is very landscape across the buildings. So that's kind of how this area works, and there's lots of things to sort of see. It's a great place to stop and sort of take in the different works, because I think there's probably more than you can see in 3 or 4 minutes in this part. Definitely an opportunity to linger. So we'll go up the bridge. So this is kind of an interesting moment. Patrick Grandi's piece here, Architecture and Idea, starts with what looks like a Petri dish, and it evolves into a sort of viscous matter, which then I would call it a rhizome. It becomes this interconnected series of points, and we move through these kind of arches that evolve around it. And in a funny way, it evokes some of the Moorish inflections of the architecture at Alys Beach. So it's really interesting from that point of view, but there's this central form, which is the idea that is in this constant state of evolution and interconnection, and it keeps transforming form until it goes down and then comes out of the Petri dish again. So it's a very sort of structured, rigorous sort of 3D piece, and it's at small scale. So it's an opportunity when you come across the bridge, you see that, you can see Backbeat Motion, you can look back at what's happening, and then we come to an interesting run of pieces. So Haru, Eddie Lohmeyer's piece on the bottom here is a landscape produced in artificial intelligence, and this is sort of a panoramic vista. And one of the things I wanted to do with this was to tie it into the built form. So it's actually wrapped around the base of the, when you see it, it's like all you can see is light. The bottom of the windmill is lit with this piece, and it's tied in and it's curved to the bottom of the windmill, so that it very much looks like it's coming out of the base. And the idea, a lot of things along here are exploring this relationship between the built and the, what we call nature and culture. So there's a kind of a dialogue about these questions along here. Will Cat, DG+E, is using this. This is the second Instagram wall. So it's the second place where people are likely to get up and take a photo. And he's produced a piece called Console Cryptids. And a cryptid is an organism that, it's a sort of speculative organism, like the Sasquatch. It's something we imagine to exist, but we don't necessarily have proof. So there's the idea of the organism without its actual, concrete evidence. It's always presumed to be there. And he uses gaming consoles in this very kind of abstracted, glitchy world. They sort of emerge out of it and seem to have this fight between, so he's using the consoles that you use with a gaming system as if in their own sense they were alive and they had this inner life, and they were kind of, the conflict that we imagine they have through us is actually something which is somewhat autonomous, that the consoles are actually taking on a life of their own and being involved in this conflict. Interestingly enough, when you see this, I worked with Will at a distance again. He's done a lot of work with really big companies like Obscura Digital in San Francisco, some of the top, projection mapping production companies around the country. And I said, look, I think this would be a good site for you. And I sent him an outline of the building here. And those 4 elements that are in front of the pots are actually all separate parts of the projection. So they're in different colors, and then they're surrounded by another kind of spill from the projector. It hits the steps, it spills out, and you get this frame which is seen in the building behind. So when you see it, it's very vibrant, but when you stop and look at it, you go, oh wow, that's really, really conscious. The whole production of it's very, very intentional to that space. Some of these things aren't always immediately obvious, but then when you look at them, you go, of course, that's only for there. So it was produced very much for this spot. There's a tower further along, and Eric Homan, who's exhibited here before, does a lot of photography, a lot of videography. He'll come to Digital Graffiti, document the whole show, and make 2 YouTube videos about it. He's just a compulsive collector of images and documentation. He's gone through his archive of footage and explored the concept of pareidolia, which is where you see faces in things. Jesus in a piece of toast, a teddy bear in the clouds. And so this, he's gone through his photos and found rocks, landscapes, trees, all which seem to give the impression of something, a horse, a face, someone looking out at you. And he's arranged them in this stacked series of vignettes. So they're kind of quite brightly colored, one top to bottom. There are 4 images, and they kind of constantly flow. And I looked at it, I thought, I know where that has to go. And so that piece is on the tower, and it's actually stacked up and wrapped around the tower. So that's the kind of thing where we'll map it quite exactly. We'll look at the tower. It came in March, projector, tested it. I'm like, perfect. Come back, we'll set it up, map it, download the mapping, resolve it with the projector. It's a lot of work, but then when you come and it looks like, oh, they just put that there, it's quite specifically put there, if that makes sense. So little things like that you'll notice, but this is very much this kind of nature culture kind of interface. I think that's a larger part of the architectural plan, because we get to the end of the sort of boundary of the precinct, and there are nature trails and things beyond here. So there's this space in which the very intentionally defined use of land and cultural artifact in Alys Beach gives way to the slightly chaotic jumble of nature. And there's always a dialogue between arrival and cultivation and the landscape on which that takes place. I think that's a fundamental sort of aspect of human experience. So there's a demonstration piece in the trees here, which is, it's hard to explain, you'll see it. It's like a portal, I guess, is a good way to describe it. And one of the things about this kind of arboreal projection is that you are moving away from the strict form of surface that we experience in many other parts of and certainly we see these plays of scope and scale and the way images fall back onto these sight lines of surface. But here we have this very different sort of chaotic surface. And so there's a dialogue between the work itself and the form on which it's projected in terms of, I can't explain it, you'll have to see it, but it just is something which is trying to take the image back to its most elemental sense of experience. So when you see it, you know what you're seeing, but you don't know how to describe it. And that's
It's also a little bit self-referential.
completely, yeah. It's kind of completely location specific. It relies on being on trees, and I can't describe it more than that. But we were careful to put the sound into the forest, and we did a wireless link for this one from here, so the sound comes out and augments it from within the forest. So just little things where we're thinking about how to enhance that part of the experience.
And this one is really unusual, and so I would encourage all of you to spend the time in front of it.
So this is Eddie's tower, and it looks totally transformed. When you see the images on it, it's like they were never not there. So you'll see Tracy's work here. Seen, stored and remembered. Worth stopping for a minute. Really beautiful, like a whole different sensibility. And this, I think it's really important in the programming here to not just encourage a rush to the bar. So there is a kind of Sybaritic urge to like grab a drink and then head to obviously there's a lot of vibrancy, and we have programmed the pool with its own set of sort of experiences. But this area, you want to get people to stop and take a moment. And I'm going to call attention to this next section. Diana Reichenbach, who's here, fabulous artist, who is showing a work called Sonolumen, which is in an iteration here, specifically addressing the trees and the building as a foreground. And I think the interesting thing, as you see this work, you'll notice that there's a treatment of the trees and the background as separate elements. So this is, again, a very interesting example of a sort of cultivated landscape, but the natural world and the built form in this kind of conjunction. And it's using those things and it's picking up on them. They become separate but coextant parts of the same projection. So really beautiful. And Diana's done a fabulous version of this in full dome, in a planetarium format. But the soundtrack, Thaddeus did the soundtrack, beautiful soundtrack. So it's really a treat, really something to sort of stop. And it's a little moment where perhaps it's more contemplative through this section before it becomes frenetic, if that makes sense. And so some of the works here are a little bit more, it's a little bit of a lyrical space before you go and, beg the DJ to keep playing past curfew. Now, interestingly, this is an emerging artists section from Hong Kong. And again, using a lot of what I would call landscape animation, but the students go out and take close field photography of elements of Hong Kong, tiles, screws, cracks in concrete, mahjong tiles, elements in the markets, and they animate them frame by frame. So they take the stills and they'll move them across the screen, or they'll have a central element which they photograph 20 times, and those 20 elements are all positioned so it becomes an animation around a central form. And this becomes like a canvas in which you'll see fabric, tiles, different kinds of architectural forms all placed back onto the building. And so it's a very playful, very creative use of that. And there are two spaces where that's happening. So I think that's really fun. And it's a great example of giving those emerging artists a space and a different kind of medium to work with. And so I'm hoping to extend the collaboration with Hong Kong into maybe working with Colette next year. We want to sort of build that out. I've been talking this week with schools in the Middle East about, bringing different kind of cultural perspectives and different kinds of artists' perspectives into the festival, because that platform is really valuable, particularly for the emerging artists, and it adds to the richness. When you see the Colette, you won't be disappointed. This year, I think it's a 16-minute program with just as many artists involved in its production. So it's really fabulous to see those young people being given such an opportunity to show their skills and to show what they can do. Diana mentored a whole group of them. So Katie did that as well. And it's just great to see Katina, who was around, we talked about her work, the cellulose photography. She had two students from Mizzou who put work into that as well.
By the way, John, I think it's so fascinating. If you were to talk to people about, DG and tell them that you were taking that facade and projecting something on it, look at how broken up it is. and then or that this where there's the layering of
Yes.
the pine trees, and then there's a lot going on visually.
Yes.
It could be, but I love the fact that artists have been able to do that.
Yeah, and I think
It's
that's
not
like,
immediately intuitive.
last year this was quite mapped. So we worked with Eddie Cadd, who's shown here a few times, and she did a really detailed, I sent her an outline of the building. She did a detailed map, a sort of projection on that building, and I tied it back to the building. And a lot of people, they loved it because it was like a fun house. You know, it had horses galloping across the porch. And I think there are two ways that this can work. One is that you extract aspects of the form and you're very precise about how you bring the form into relief, maybe just doing columns. You'll see that on Della. It's all just on the uprights of that building. So that's one approach. And the other approach which we've done this year is to project, and the depth effect works with the work to produce a sort of integration, disintegration. So the work itself, because of its nature, you read it like as a set of layers and as a complete work. And so that relationship between the image and the building is in constant dialogue. It's an image, it's a building, it's an image, it's a building. And you're almost oscillating between those two states. And I think that's where the art and the architecture come together and form this new, very dynamic sort of conjunction. You know, that's what we're sort of aiming for. So there's not one approach to doing that, but if you're careful about how you build different things into the work, I think that's definitely one of the effects for the audience anyway.
Have you ever had an artist that got upset because their work was not necessarily projected on a flat
Yep,
surface?
all the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
all the time. And I'm like, I had an artist on the Instagram wall, yeah. And I'm like, here, oh, it seems like there's a lot of stuff on that wall. It's like, have you seen?
I know.
You know, so yeah, there's going to be some windows or something. You know, that's part of the joy. Eddie, who I spoke about last year doing the piece down here, is doing this big vertical this year, and this is done. It's really interesting. She collaborated with a photographer, commercial photographer, and they produced what are sort of prima facie these beautiful black and white commercial images of people. But then she cuts, slices, extracts elements of them, makes 3D forms come out of them. And so there's this constant disassembly of these perfected images. So what would appear to be a series of perfectly acceptable, you know, catalogue model shots for like Abercrombie and Fitch become this very vibrant series of questions about what it is to look or what it is to be seen in public. And, you know, there are moments when it just dissolves into these kind of animations which extract nothing but the form of the building. So it's constantly oscillating between this kind of idea of the perfect image of a person, its deconstructed form, and the building itself. It's a really interesting piece. Very simple, but quite arresting to see at that scale. And again, the human face, you know, 60 feet high, really extracts a sort of a response from the audience. I'll just make note as we come down here, there are three more things which are worth looking at, or four in detail. To the right, there are a series of windows, and Scott Upshur from Colorado has put a zoetropic image on there. And so he has placed in each of the windows a series of smaller frames in which a figure of a dancing girl is extracted in time. So she dances in time across these hundreds of images which are projected into the windows. Because the curtains are drawn, it's actually mapped to the exact frame of the windows, and what you see is this kind of glowing impression of, like, you look through and people are like, is that from inside? Like, how is that being...
Until you see the movement, until you see the dancing figures.
So it's quite lovely, but it's actually going back to that concept of the very genesis of the moving image and the early hand-cranked zoetropes and praxinoscopes, which had very simple looped animation and reassembled still images into a moving image. It's like the pre-history of the moving image, if you like. And so he's taking that and producing a kind of expanded zoetrope within the windows. Lovely work. Diego Mauricio from Bolivia is on the Colette, we call it the oculus because it's got that beautiful like eye in the center of it. And his work is a really lyrical set of patterns which emerge up and down the building. But he sort of does this, I would call it, he uses a lot of traditional soundtrack elements, and he's interested in a kind of technical mysticism, if you like. So it's a very flat, almost filigree expression of these lines which are drawn across the whole surface. They become three-dimensional. Things come out and in 3D out of the orifice in the center of the building. They move back in, and the whole building sort of breathes open and breathes closed with the animation. It's made exactly for that. So I sent him an outline of the building from Marieanne, gave us the architectural plans. We send that to him. He composes to that, and then we pin it back to the building to make it kind of precisely mapped. So it's a very mapped piece of work. Johanna from the Netherlands has a film called Links, and that uses like an incredibly detailed process where she produces a speculative Amsterdam and a speculative Links. And the Links is a statue, and then it's a cat, and then it's a drawing, and then it's a crystalline form, and then it's something which is animated across the surface of the buildings as a drawing. It's technically incredibly detailed, but the whole point of her work is the Links is a traditional symbol in sort of shamanistic lore that is both a portal but also a little bit of a tricky portal to higher knowledge. So she's proposing that the Links in this sense is a kind of slippery figure, a figure who goes through multiple mutations, and particularly because it's produced with AI, some part of this work speculates that AI itself is a kind of portal to something new, but it's also a false prophet. You know, it's leading us somewhere in which the outcome is not, it can be a little tricky in what its outcomes or what its intentions are. I hope that makes sense. So she's using the metaphor of the Links quite literally to embody this process. And again, it's typical of using AI in the tool set. I'm not going to withdraw something and say, oh, it's AI, you didn't do that. She worked. I can see the craft and I can see the work that's been put into this. It's phenomenal. It's really interesting. So quite lovely transmutation of form of the cat. It's really beautiful as you see it emerge. And the last one, fractals, there's a small sort of statial section which is permeable in the building, and it's made of computer carved, CNC cut stone. And so they're arranged in a grid pattern, and it produces a sort of very formal porous wall. It's quite strong and material, but it's also not impervious. There's a porosity to the outside because of these regular carvings set into the blocks. And so we've put a piece on there which is very much like a princess cut jewel in terms of how it looks. And it's exploring the idea that light performs these jewel-like functions as it's layered back onto itself. And so that last piece is a dialogue between the kind of idea of light and refraction and movement, creating the illusion of something that's there, and the kind of very structured and considered materiality of the wall. And they sit together and they form something completely different, but they're harmonious in terms of their form and the way they sit together. So there's quite a conscious sense of not just what the work is or where it kind of looks cool, but also Marieanne's work in producing those very, very nuanced details, which are particular to each place. We're trying to honour that in the precinct of Alys Beach in a way that is meaningful to the architecture and to the materiality of its form. So it's an important kind of conjunction, and it's a great kind of anchor piece. It's very subtle, it's very gentle, but it's an anchor piece for this whole idea of what the festival is bringing together the works and the buildings into this new conjunction. That will then open up to Colette, emerging artists. We set that up last night. It's 264 feet long or 50. It's a lot of building. And so we've got 3 projectors right across there, 16-minute program, lots of young artists putting stuff up there. And it's one of those things which sort of sits as a big visual anchor to that whole McGee area, food trucks. You'll get people sitting down on sofas and just kind of kicking back. It's like an open air cinema of, we don't quite know what, but we like it. So look, I mean, thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it. It's the first time we've done a walking tour, I think, and we're really humbled that people are interested to come and
hear about the process. We hope it unpacks a little bit of what the show is, and the many, I can't thank enough our fabulous artists who are here, who are supported by their families, their partners. It's really humbling to have people come and be part of the process. I think one of the things that I really feel is that we have built a sort of community of interest. And I think the festival is quite special because people come and they have a chance to connect with like-minded individuals. They can use it as a laboratory, they can propose other kinds of works. And we're quite open about that, about providing that opportunity for people to do as they will, in a sense, but also to become part. I mean, there's been a real engagement from people who come every year and produce work diligently every year, because this is, I think Patrick Kumanich, who couldn't come this year, said, I'm really sad, I can't be there. And it's like summer camp. I go every year and I see all my friends and we kind of hang out at the beach, and it's great. You know, so I always feel that it's a brilliant opportunity because you can't do any projection in the day. So you have to enjoy the beautiful coastline or go and have a nice meal or ride a bike or something. Yeah. George is plagued by the demands of the lifestyle. But no, I think it's really true. And it's really beautiful that the Alys Beach community has sustained this process and sort of elevated it. There's a mutual kind of expression of gifting, I think. You know, everything that's beautiful and valuable in life is an expression of surplus, that we give something that beyond what we need to. And that's, there's a kind of abundance of gifting in this, in terms of the generosity of the community, the generosity of the Alys Foundation, Marieanne's, you know, incredible generosity of considered form in the area here. All of the work that the events team do, you know, the crews, everyone goes beyond, you know, they're here to midnight, the crew. They started at least a 12-hour day, every day. But all of that is important because people have this sense of wanting it to be something special. So, and the fact that you're going to come along and listen to us bang on for a couple of hours, that's fantastic too, right? Because there's an interest in the cultivation of something, that it is a crossing point. It's germinal of ideas, of conversations, of experiences. And then the beautiful thing about this, once it's gone, it's like it was never here. So we live for that moment, and we love that sort of transitory nature. It's a little poignant, but it reminds us that so many beautiful things in life are really part of the passing show. So thank you all for coming. It's been fantastic.